You'll appreciate this. I grew up, I think, with one of your friends. He was somebody I spent every summer with. His children are my good friends, and we just partnered together on a fund to help raise money for the people that were devastated in Lahaina, Maui. But I grew up with Wayne Dyer, and I know that you and Wayne knew each other well. And by the way, and I would say it to Wayne's face back then. I was like, "Oh, come on, manifest my destiny, Wayne. Yeah, I'm gonna the power of positive thinking. And he'd laugh, and he was a great guy. And
yes, he was a good father, and a really amazing father too.
And those. Is it 9 kids?
Yes.
Who are all really close to my family to this day. But, when you talk about habits, you talk about it, Tony, in a language that makes sense to me, like the habit of how I think about my day.
Yes.
I made one of my New Year's resolutions to get up every day and, meditate and reach out to someone, which, by the way, I'm not going to pretend like I'm super succeeding at all of this, but I need to build the habits. And there's something like functional and understandable about making this type of thinking a habit that has essentially compound interest in my life.
Yes, it builds. Well, I give your viewers and listeners maybe a chance to consider it. Think about it this way. I'm pragmatic. By the way, I have very strong spiritual beliefs. I don't think there's a separation between those. Personally, everything in the world is spiritual. God is a part of my life in every way. I feel I'm only here because I've been blessed. I started with absolutely nothing. I've done my part. But I could have done my part and not been so blessed. I don't take that for granted ever. But from a pragmatic perspective, if the quality of our life is what we focus on, then I tell people there's 3 decisions you're making every moment. And your audience can ask themselves, is this happening right now? Every moment of your life, you're making 3 decisions. You're not necessarily making them consciously, though. And because of that, we make the same decisions over and over, and our life doesn't usually change. So the first decision is, what are you going to focus on? So at any moment, whatever you focus on, you're going to feel. If you make it to 7 p.m. to have dinner with your wife or your boyfriend or girlfriend or someone, and you get at 7 and they're not there, I'll ask people, what are you feeling? And some people go, I'm angry. And some people say, I'm worried. And I'm going, it's only 7. What if it's 7:30 and they're not there? Now I'm really angry. What if it's 8:30? They've not called, they not text, not showed up. I'm really angry. One woman said to me, I'm full. I didn't wait for the bastard. But the difference between whether you're angry or pissed off or worried has nothing to do with life. Objectivity. It's what you did in your head. If they were late and you're in your head, they always do this. They don't care. They're probably screwing around with somebody else. You're angry. If you said in your head, oh my gosh, what if they were in a car accident? Now you're worried. So we think the world is controlled by the outside. It's really our decisions of what to focus on. And the second decision is, what does it mean? Is this the end or the beginning? If you think it's the end of a relationship, you're going to make a very different decision than if you think it's the beginning of a relationship, right? In the beginning, you'll do anything. In the end, it's like, I don't know, type of thing. Is this person disrespecting me? Are they challenging me? Are they coaching me? Are they loving me? Whatever meaning you come up with will radically change your emotions, and that controls the third decision, what am I going to do? But let me give you a pragmatic way they could use this right now. Here's a couple patterns of focus that control your life completely. One question I'll ask you, and your audience can answer it for themselves. Do you tend to focus more on what you have or what's missing, especially with COVID and so forth? Where have you focused more on what you have or what's missing? What would you say for you, Will?
For me, what's missing.
Yes. And that's true of most achievers. And so what's good about that is it gives you some drive. What's bad about that is you can never stay fully fulfilled, because when you're constantly focusing what's missing, you never get to fill up with that joy and have it last, because you're always the next thing. That's what puts people on the hamster wheel. And especially during COVID, it was really easy to go what's missing, because there seemed to be a lot missing. But if you can focus on a different habit, the habit of what I have first, that feeling of gratitude changes your biochemistry. This is science. It's not attitudes or just mindsets. And in fact, think about this. The 2 emotions that mess people up in their relationships and their business and their career are fear and anger. Well, when you're grateful, you can't be angry and grateful simultaneously. And you can't be fearful and grateful simultaneously. So I have a thing I do every morning for 10 minutes, which taps into that gratitude and puts me in that state every day. Another pattern, do you tend to focus on what you can or can't control? What would you say you do? We both do. We all do both, right? Which one do you focus more on?
Well, I would say this is a big issue in my life. I am much more fulfilled when I have control, even if I fail at that control, than when I am out of control. So as far as my focus, it's probably on obtaining some measure of control, because the out of control focus is so unproductive for me, and I hate the way I feel. It's the source of most of my unhappiness.
Well, it's true for most people, because all the research shows the more you feel in control of the events of your life versus your events are controlling you directly affects to your level of happiness and self-esteem. But the majority of people, and I think you'd be different in this area, most of the people that come see me, they come see me because they want to take control of their finances or their business or their relationship or their body or their energy or their happiness, right? So I tend to bring those people in. But think about this. If you're constantly focusing on what you can't control, what kind of stress are you going to have inside? And if you're adding to that, you're not, but people add to that, what's missing? And then here's the third one. Do you tend to focus more on the past? Everyone listening can try this. The present or the future? We all do all three. But where do you spend more of your time? Focused on the past, present, or future? What would it be for you?
I heard you do this with Theo, and he said the past. And I was riding along in this decision tree with him, and my answer is different. Mine is on the future. So. And you can add mine up there. Mine is focus on what I don't have, focus on the future, and focus on how I can obtain control.
and you just described the core of your personality in three areas of focus. And by the way, yours is very proactive. It's an achiever orientation. That's why you've achieved. Someone who's always focused on what they can't control. There's so much we can't control in our lives. You can't, listen, you think you're in control? Your brain doesn't even control your bowels if you go to Mexico and eat the wrong food. I mean, let's be honest, right? You don't have full control in this life. We have influence. We can control our thoughts and our emotions if we learn how to, but most people haven't learned how to. But imagine somebody who is constantly focusing on what they can't control, what's missing, think COVID, and then the past. Well, you can't change the past. You put those three together and you have somebody that's going to be angry or depressed. So I get people all the time who are, been on, I ask people in live audiences a lot of time. I have 10, 15, 20,000 people. How many of you know someone, I'll ask them, who takes antidepressants and they're still depressed? 90% of the room raises their hand. Well, why? Because when you take antidepressant, all it does is it numbs you. In fact, a year ago, 2022, the cover of Newsweek was showing SSRIs don't even work, but we're still selling them. But, the good news is you can learn to change these. Stanford decided during the middle of COVID, they reached out to me because two of their professors went to one of my programs, and they both were clinically depressed and came out with no symptoms of depression. And they said, do you have data on this? And I said, well, I have millions of graduates. They said, but I mean like scientific data. I said, well, no, but would you like to do a study? They said, we'd love to. So I said, well, if we're going to do it, you're going to do it on depression, because during COVID, the amount of depression exploded, as you know, and the amount of suicides exploded, overdoses. I said, well, what is the average across, meta studies? How well do people get under current approaches? And they said, well, Tony, the average is 60% make no improvement, whether doing drugs or therapy or both. 40% on average across the meta studies improve, but their improvement is about 50%, so they're half as depressed. Now, some people get well, but very few. Most of them take these drugs for years or even decades. And I said, man, you could almost get that with a placebo. And they said, you're right. I said, what's the best study you've ever done? They said it was done 5 years ago at Johns Hopkins. They took people for 30 days and gave them psilocybin, which is magic mushrooms, for 30 days, along with cognitive therapy. And I said, well, you must have got a change out of that. And they said, yes, it was the most success they'd ever had in the history of depression treatment. After 6 weeks, 54% of the people had no symptoms of depression. I said, well, why don't you, do your example against that for us? They did the study. The numbers were it was a 5-day seminar, no drugs, no cognitive therapy. It's called Date with Destiny. I do it once a year. And they then followed up. The numbers were so insane, they didn't want to get, blacklisted or, canceled. So they sent out all the data blindly to 3 other organizations. Here's the result. After 6 weeks, 0% of those people had clinical depression, no symptoms whatsoever. 17% went in with suicidal ideation. They all left with no suicidal ideation. 11 months later, follow-up, no depression, 71% reduction in negative emotions, 52% increase in positive emotions. So now we're doing a 1-year study that's on quiet quitting, to give you an idea, in business as well. So we just change a few things, and you radically change how people feel and how they operate. And there's some simple, pragmatic things you can do.
Tony, one of the things, and I've had this conversation here on the Will Cain Show over the last couple of weeks. I'm going to give you an example. You don't have to address the example, but, I would talk about the Republican primary, and I would say, listen, something's not working for Ron DeSantis. It was just an analysis of reality, right? Yes. It's not endorsement. It's not I'm not waving pom poms, and I'm not cheering, anyone's failure. I'm just trying to accurately assess reality. And my argument to the audience is you have to accurately assess reality in order to change reality.
Yes.
And but so much in news, especially when it comes to politics, has become don't say anything negative because essentially we want to manifest our destiny. Like talk positive and then it turns positive. The reason I'm bringing that up is I think you need to understand reality. I think that's step
page.
One. Mm-hmm. Step two, diagnose, improve reality after you've analyzed it. That's right. So you're talking about SSRIs here. Here's what I would ask you. So we know that young women are having a huge problem with depression, kind of starting around their teens, and it seems to correlate with the adoption of social media.
Without a doubt.
We know that young men are having a big problem, maybe a little bit later, but we see the suicide and depression with young men. I've speculated as to why. You are very well positioned to tell us what is the diagnosis of reality? What is happening with young men and maybe with young women as well when it comes to depression?
Well, the studies with young women, the more they spend time on social media, the more likely they are depressed. And it's because we have this insane double standard for women, which is they're supposed to look like, somebody that's on heroin, that their body is skinny and acts a certain way and be a certain way. And as you know, no one actually publishes reality in social media. They use filters and they make stuff look better. They make their life look better than it is. And so people feel about their lives by comparing who they're around. Well, that used to be the people you growing up with. Now you're comparing to multi-billionaires, models, and people of that nature. And so it's overwhelming for women because it's so insane that they're held to the standard. Men don't have the same standard. You see, men usually are more suicidal because they feel like they're not enough and don't have a compelling future. They don't have a place in society. Yes. They don't have a way of making it. They don't have a way of proving who they are. And, when I did Theo's piece, the thing that struck me again was how many men like he are focused on the past, feeling like they're worthless, feeling like they're not enough. I mean, Theo's a genius in what he does, and yet he still was operating from kind of the past. His focus has been on these meanings he made about himself years ago, and he's gotten so used to it, as he described it, it's like a friend. It's like this sadness, this overwhelm is like a friend. Well, I said, it is not your friend. It's just a habit. I call it an emotional home. When you see people, like, for example, in some parts of the country where a cyclone comes in or a storm, it destroys their home and they're crying and they got nothing left, but at least they survived. And you'd have to have, ice in your veins not to care for them. But when you see them rebuild and go through it again, about the third time, most people's brains go, why don't you move? But they don't move because it's all they know. It's their home. And we have an emotional home. And even if it's not a good place, we go back to what we know. So what I show people is it's time to maybe, you don't have to give up your home, but maybe it's time to expand your home and have it include a new set of emotions. If I had your audience write down on a piece of paper right now, and I'll do this in seminars, I'll say, draw a line down the middle, and on the left side, write every positive emotion you experience in an average week. Not once a year, not once a month, but once a week at least or more. On the right side, write all the emotions that are negative that you experience in an average week. And I give them as much time as they need. The average person comes up with 12 emotions. And some got more positive, some got more negative, but the thing you see is there are 3,800 words in the English language for different emotions. And we have the same emotions over and over again. We use the same words to describe them. We use our body the same way. And so what I show people is how to expand it. You're ripping yourself off by having such a limited list of emotions, but people do it because of what they know. So I put people in environments where their energy is so high, their biochemistry changes. And now they start to feel differently and they start to link it. It's like if I asked you where you were during 9/11, if you're not an American, most people can tell me where they were, who was with them, what they saw. If I asked you where you were on 8/11, you have no clue unless something special happened because information without emotion is not retained. So I produce high levels of emotion and then we make the changes. And that's why when they did the studies, for example, at Stanford, they go, how is this lasting a year later with no interaction? Because it was anchored into their nervous system with so much emotion at the time. It's in their bodies, not just their heads.